"Don't drink that, sir. If you do, she's going to smile while you die." The little girl's voice was so quiet that at first only the man holding the crystal glass heard her. Vincent Romano stopped with the dark red wine less than an inch from his lips. The ballroom fell strangely still. A silver-embroidered cocktail napkin clung to the base of the glass, stained by a single wet fingerprint. "Take the child outside," a woman said with a graceful smile that never reached her eyes. The little girl tightened her grip on Vincent's sleeve and whispered one more sentence. "She already touched your glass." 3 hours earlier, Grace Parker stood in the service hallway behind Romano Manor with a stack of folded white napkins almost as tall as her chest. She was 7 years old, small for her age, and wore a blue sweater that had belonged to someone else's daughter long before it belonged to her. One sleeve was shorter than the other. Her mother had stitched the cuff back together with white thread that did not match the fabric. Grace did not complain. Her mother had worked 16 days without a day off, and tonight's engagement party was supposed to mean extra money. "Stay close to the kitchen," her mother, Emily, had whispered while tying on her apron. "Don't wander. Don't touch anything expensive. And if anyone asks, you're waiting for me to finish work." Grace nodded because she always nodded. She knew the rules of rich houses. Children like her stayed out of photographs. They stayed out of conversations. Most of all, they stayed out of the way of people like Vincent Romano. Even she knew his name. The newspapers called him a businessman. The city called him a philanthropist. Other people lowered their voices when they spoke about him. Grace only knew that dozens of black cars had arrived before sunset and that every guard at the gates carried himself as if the world outside the walls could start a war at any moment. She carried the napkins toward the pantry and stopped. Someone was standing by the long oak table where the drinks for the evening were being prepared. It was Evelyn Carter, the woman whose picture had been printed beside Vincent's in magazines for weeks. She was beautiful in the careful way expensive paintings were beautiful. Her silver dress caught the light every time she moved. But Grace noticed something strange. Evelyn was not looking at the flowers or the trays or the guests gathering outside. She was looking over her shoulder. Once, twice. Then she picked up a crystal glass. Grace would have kept walking if it had not been for the smell. It drifted through the hallway for only a second. Sweet, sharp, wrong. It did not smell like wine. It did not smell like perfume either. It reminded Grace of the bitter medicine her grandmother used to hide in applesauce before she died. Evelyn reached into her evening purse and took out something small. A silver bottle no bigger than a thumb. Grace could not see what happened next because Evelyn unfolded a white cocktail napkin and covered the glass with it. When she moved the napkin away, the bottle was gone. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Evelyn smiled instantly. Warm, polite, perfect. "You must be Emily's little girl," she said. Grace nodded. "You're a good helper, aren't you?" Grace nodded again. Evelyn bent down and touched her shoulder. Her hand was cold. "Then help me with a tiny secret. Don't tell anyone I borrowed one of these glasses early. Vincent likes everything to be a surprise." Grace looked at the crystal glass. Then at the white napkin. There was a damp mark in the middle of the cloth. "All right?" Evelyn asked. Grace wanted to say yes. She wanted to make things easy for her mother. But something felt wrong. "Why did you cover the glass?" she asked. Evelyn laughed softly. "Because fingerprints ruin crystal." The answer sounded nice. It should have made sense. Instead, Grace looked down and noticed something else. Resting beside the glass was a silver lighter engraved with the letters VR. Evelyn's smile faded for less than a heartbeat before she picked it up. She slid the lighter into her purse so quickly that she probably thought no one had seen. Then she carried the glass toward the ballroom. Grace stood alone in the hallway. She looked down at the oak table. Something white had been left behind. It was the cocktail napkin Evelyn had used to cover the glass. In the center of the cloth was a wet circle that smelled sweet and bitter at the same time, and stitched into one corner in silver thread was a single letter. E. Grace did not leave the napkin where she found it. She folded it once, then again, careful not to smear the damp circle in the middle, and slipped it into the pocket of her old sweater. The sweet, Bitter smell followed her as she hurried toward the kitchen. She kept telling herself that rich people probably had strange perfumes and expensive drinks and odd little secrets. But her grandmother had once told her that when something felt wrong, she should never let a polite smile talk her out of it. The kitchen was louder than the hallway. Pots rattled. Bread came out of the ovens. Cooks shouted over one another. For a few minutes, the noise made the strange feeling inside Grace shrink. Her mother smiled when she saw her. "You stayed close. Thank you, sweetheart." Grace smiled back and reached for a basket of dinner rolls. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then she smelled it again. That same sharp sweetness drifted through the air. She turned so quickly that one of the rolls fell onto the floor. Evelyn had walked into the kitchen. She wasn't supposed to be there. Guests stayed in the ballroom. She carried herself with that same calm smile, but now she had a different crystal glass in her hand. "Emily," Evelyn said warmly, "Vincent wants the special reserve brought out early." Grace watched her set the glass down for only a second before picking it back up. The silver bottle was gone, but the white cocktail napkin wrapped around the stem looked exactly like the one in Grace's pocket. Evelyn's eyes moved across the room and stopped on Grace. "There's our little helper," she said. "Did you find your mother?" Grace nodded. "Good," Evelyn answered. "You know, good girls don't repeat grown-up conversations." Then she smiled at Emily as if she had said something kind and walked away. Grace waited until the kitchen doors closed before pulling the folded napkin from her pocket. "Mama," she whispered, "does perfume ever smell like medicine?" Emily barely looked up from slicing lemons. "Some of the expensive ones do. What if it doesn't?" Emily finally stopped working. She looked at the cloth in Grace's hand. "Where did you get that?" Grace opened her mouth, but another cook called Emily's name. The moment passed. "Throw it away," Emily said quietly. "Don't bring strange things home." Grace nodded, but she did not throw it away. She slipped it back into her pocket. Across the estate, Vincent Romano stood alone in his study for the first time that evening. His engagement party was already filling the ballroom, but he had found a few quiet minutes before making his entrance. On the desk sat a stack of papers waiting for his signature. Charity donations, business contracts, guest lists. His phone vibrated. A message from Evelyn. "Where are you? Everyone is waiting." Vincent smiled faintly. Then his eyes moved to the silver lighter in his hand. He frowned. He could not remember where he had left it earlier that afternoon. He always carried it. Always. He reached into his jacket pocket out of habit anyway. Empty. Strange. Someone knocked on the study door. His consigliera stepped inside. "5 more minutes," Vincent said. The older man nodded. "One small thing, sir. Security had a camera problem near the service hallway." Vincent looked up. "Problem?" 3 minutes of footage disappeared. Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Technical issue?" The consigliera hesitated. "That's what they're saying." Vincent looked toward the dark window. 3 missing minutes. He tapped the desk once with his finger and let it go. There would be time to ask questions later. In the kitchen, Grace was carrying a tray of clean glasses when she passed the service entrance. 2 voices drifted through the cracked door. One belonged to Evelyn. The other belonged to a man Grace did not know. "Did he notice?" the man asked. "No," Evelyn answered. "He never notices small things." Grace held her breath. "And the glass?" "I changed it," Evelyn said softly. "The only problem now is the little girl." Grace stepped back so quickly that the tray shook in her hands. One crystal glass slid across the silver surface and almost fell. She caught it just in time. As she steadied the tray, she noticed something that made the back of her neck turn cold. Tucked beneath the base of the glass was a small white receipt from the estate florist. Someone had scribbled 2 words across the back in dark blue ink. Table 12. Table 12. Grace read the words again because they did not make any sense. The ballroom had 20 tables arranged beneath glittering chandeliers, each covered in white roses and crystal candle holders. But the service staff had spent all afternoon memorizing the seating chart. Table 12 was different. It was reserved for family. Not just guests. Family. She slipped the small florist's receipt into the same pocket that held the folded cocktail napkin and looked toward the cracked service door. The voices had stopped. She waited another few seconds before peeking through the opening. The hallway was empty. Evelyn and the man were gone. Only the polished marble floor remained, reflecting the warm lights overhead. Grace. Her mother's voice made her jump. Emily hurried toward her and took the heavy tray from her hands. Where have you been? I was just... Grace stopped herself. She looked at the pocket of her sweater. Looking around. Emily studied her daughter's face for a long second. You're pale. Mama. Grace lowered her voice. Do we know who sits at table 12? Emily's hands froze on the tray, just for a second. Then she looked away. Don't worry about things like that. But who? Emily forced a smile. Rich people and their friends. That's all. It sounded like an answer someone gave because they wanted a conversation to end. Grace knew the difference. She had heard that voice before when the landlord came asking for rent money her mother did not have. Emily touched Grace's hair gently. Promise me you'll stay in the kitchen now. Grace nodded. She waited until her mother disappeared through the swinging doors before taking the florist's receipt out again. Someone had written the words quickly. The blue ink had bled through the paper. On the front was the time of delivery. 7:30 p.m. Grace looked toward the large grandfather clock near the ballroom entrance. 7:28. A cold feeling settled into her stomach. Whatever table 12 meant. It was supposed to happen very soon. Upstairs, Vincent Romano stood near the balcony overlooking the ballroom. Guests laughed below him. String musicians played softly. His fiancée moved through the crowd with perfect grace, greeting politicians, judges, and business partners as though she had belonged to the Romano family forever. His consigliera stepped beside him. Security checked the service hallway. Vincent did not look away from the crowd. And no one remembers seeing anything unusual. Vincent rested one hand on the balcony rail. No one, except one dishwasher. Vincent turned. What did he say? He said Miss Carter asked everyone to leave the hallway for a few minutes because she wanted a surprise for you. Vincent's expression did not change. A surprise. Yes, sir. Vincent looked back toward Evelyn. She laughed at something one of the guests said. Then she lifted her champagne glass. For the briefest moment, she glanced toward the service entrance. Not toward the kitchen. Toward the hallway where the missing camera footage had disappeared. Vincent noticed because he had spent his whole life watching people who lied for a living. He said nothing. Downstairs, Grace wandered closer to the ballroom entrance carrying a basket of dinner rolls. She did not mean to spy. She only wanted to see table 12. The cards marking each table had been written in elegant black script. 9, 10, 11. Then she stopped. Table 12 was empty. 12 chairs. 12 crystal glasses. 12 place settings. No guests. One chair sat slightly apart from the others. On the plate rested a small black envelope sealed with silver wax. A waiter hurried over and blocked her view. Move along, sweetheart. Grace obeyed. But as she turned away, she heard two older women talking nearby. Such a shame, one whispered. What is? The other asked. Mr. Romano insisted his brother's place stay empty again this year. Grace slowed her steps. I thought his brother died years ago. He did, the woman answered quietly. At this very estate. Grace felt the folded receipt pressing against her pocket. 7:30. Table 12. Empty seat for a dead brother. She looked back toward the lonely table and noticed something no one else seemed to see. Sitting beside the black envelope was a crystal wine glass, wrapped carefully in a white cocktail napkin with a silver letter E stitched into the corner. Grace could not stop looking at the crystal glass. It sat at the empty place setting as though someone expected a guest who would never arrive. The white cocktail napkin around the stem matched the one hidden in her sweater pocket so perfectly that she felt her fingers curl against the fabric without thinking. Young lady. The voice came from behind her. Grace turned to find an older man in a black tuxedo. His silver hair was neat. His expression was polite. The kind of polite that made people step aside without being asked twice. "The service entrance is on the other side of the ballroom," he said. Grace nodded. "I know, sir." "Then you also know that family tables are not for staff." She looked back at table 12. "I was just looking." "Looking has a way of becoming gossip," the man answered gently. "Mr. Romano values loyalty. I suggest you remember that." He held out his hand. "What do you have in your pocket?" Grace did not move. "Nothing." "Then you won't mind showing me." Her fingers tightened around the folded receipt and the damp cocktail napkin. Across the ballroom, Emily looked up from the dessert station. The color left her face. She started toward them, but Evelyn reached her first. "Emily," Evelyn said warmly enough for nearby guests to hear, "please don't worry. I'm sure your daughter is only curious." Grace looked at Evelyn. The smile was perfect. The eyes were not. "Children sometimes imagine things," Evelyn continued, "especially when they're nervous around important people." Several guests nodded politely. The older man kept his hand extended. "The pocket, please." Grace looked at her mother. Emily's lips moved without sound. "Let it go. Go back to the kitchen. Forget it." Grace understood why. Rent was due in 4 days. Jobs like this did not come twice. She could make everything easier by handing over the napkin and pretending she had seen nothing. Instead, she shook her head. "My grandma said not to give strangers things that don't belong to them." A few people nearby stopped talking. The older man's smile faded by a fraction. "Those items belong to the estate." "No, sir," Grace answered quietly. "I picked them up because someone left them behind." Evelyn took one small step forward. "Grace, isn't it? You're a very honest little girl." Grace nodded. "Then honest girls should tell the truth." "I am." "Did you perhaps take something by mistake?" Evelyn asked softly. Sometimes children think shiny things are toys. Grace looked directly at her. "I didn't take the glass." The ballroom seemed to grow quieter. Evelyn let out a small laugh. "Of course not." "I took the napkin," Grace said. Emily closed her eyes. The older man folded his hands together. "There we are. A misunderstanding. Return it and no one will think another word about it." Grace did not move. "Why?" she asked. "Because it belongs here." "Then why was it hidden?" The question hung in the air. Evelyn answered too quickly. "It wasn't hidden." Grace tilted her head. "Then why did you cover the glass with it?" Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. Vincent Romano had reached the ballroom floor without anyone noticing. He stood only a few feet away, speaking quietly with 2 business partners. He could not hear every word, but he saw Emily standing frozen. He saw the older man questioning a 7-year-old child in front of a room full of strangers. He saw Evelyn smiling too hard. Vincent excused himself and started walking toward them. The older man noticed first. "Mr. Romano," he said smoothly. "A small misunderstanding with one of the staff children." Vincent looked at Grace. She stood alone in a borrowed sweater while adults 2 and 3 times her size waited for her to empty her pockets. "A misunderstanding?" Vincent asked. "She wandered into a private area," Evelyn answered. "We were simply helping her avoid embarrassment." Grace looked up at Vincent. She did not ask for help. She did not cry. She reached into her pocket and placed the folded florist's receipt in her palm. "Sir," she said, "I think someone made a mistake." Vincent looked down at the paper. Before he could take it, a waiter rushed across the ballroom carrying a tray of champagne. He stumbled. One glass tipped over. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth at table 12. Guests gasped and servants hurried forward with fresh linens. In the confusion, everyone looked at the stain. Grace looked at the empty chair. The crystal glass wrapped in the white napkin was gone. The empty space where the crystal glass had been seemed to pull every eye in the ballroom toward it. The servants rushed to clean the spilled wine. Guests laughed nervously and returned to their conversations. And within seconds the missing glass had become something everyone had seen and no one wanted to mention. Grace looked at the empty chair. Vincent looked at Grace. Neither of them spoke. "Mr. Romano," the older man said smoothly, "allow me to handle this." Vincent did not answer. His eyes stayed on the table. 12 chairs. One empty place for a dead brother. One missing glass. One little girl holding a folded florist's receipt. Grace took one careful step forward. "Sir." Vincent looked down at her. "I think they took the wrong thing." Evelyn laughed softly. "Sweetheart." Someone simply cleared the table. Grace shook her head. "No, ma'am." She pointed at the white tablecloth. "They left the napkin ring." Vincent followed her finger. A polished silver ring lay beside the empty plate. Every place setting had one. Except this one still held a tiny scrap of white cloth caught beneath it. Someone had pulled the napkin away too quickly. Vincent bent down and picked up the silver ring himself. Tucked inside was a folded piece of paper no bigger than a postage stamp. He unfolded it slowly. It was not a note. It was a receipt. A dry cleaning ticket. The date was 3 days earlier. The item listed was simple. 1 white evening jacket. 1 wine stain removed. Vincent stared at the ticket longer than seemed necessary. Evelyn stepped closer. "That's strange," she said lightly. "Perhaps one of the guests dropped it." Vincent looked at her. "Perhaps." Grace watched his face. Something had changed. Not much. Just enough that he was no longer looking at the paper. He was remembering something. 3 nights earlier, Evelyn had arrived late for dinner. She had apologized for a charity meeting that ran long. She had worn a white jacket. He remembered because she had laughed about spilling wine on herself. He remembered because she had asked him to throw the jacket away. Vincent folded the ticket and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you," he said to Grace. Evelyn's smile held, but her fingers tightened around her champagne glass. "Mr. Romano," the older man interrupted. "Your guests are waiting." Vincent nodded. "They can wait another minute." Grace reached into her sweater pocket again. Emily saw the movement from across the room and nearly dropped a serving tray. "Grace," she whispered. But Grace had already made up her mind. She held out the folded cocktail napkin she had kept hidden since the hallway. "I think this goes with the paper." Evelyn's eyes found the cloth immediately. "You still have that?" The question escaped before she could stop it. The ballroom seemed to shrink. Grace looked at her. "You knew I had it?" Evelyn smiled too quickly. "I only meant—" She stopped. Vincent held out his hand. Grace placed the napkin in his palm. The sweet, bitter smell had faded, but it had not disappeared. Vincent unfolded the cloth carefully. In one corner, beneath the silver embroidered letter E, was another stain. Not wine. A faint gray smudge. Vincent rubbed it gently with his thumb. The color darkened. Powder. His expression stayed calm, but he looked toward his consigliere standing across the ballroom. The older man understood without a word. He walked over quietly. Vincent handed him both the napkin and the dry cleaning receipt. "Keep these," he said. "Don't lose them." Evelyn took a small sip of champagne. Her hand shook just enough to make the bubbles touch the rim of the glass. "Vincent," she said softly. "Surely we're letting a child spoil a beautiful evening." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Grace. "Children notice strange things," he said. "Sometimes adults stop paying attention." Grace lowered her eyes. She had expected him to give the napkin back. Instead, he kept the empty silver ring in his hand. His thumb moved over the polished metal again and again. Finally, he spoke so quietly that only the people nearest him could hear. "3 nights ago," he said almost to himself, "you told me that wine stain happened at the charity auction." Evelyn's smile did not disappear, but she did not answer. Vincent closed his hand around the silver ring and looked at the dry cleaning receipt one last time. The address printed across the top was not the charity district across town. It was a cleaner less than 2 blocks from Romano Manor, and directly across the street from the private florist who had delivered the arrangements for Table 12. The address on the dry cleaning receipt stayed in Vincent Romano's hand long after the music started again. Around him, the engagement party returned to life as though nothing had happened. Crystal glasses touched. Laughter rolled across the ballroom. Someone at the piano began playing an old Italian love song. Vincent folded the receipt once and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Enjoy the evening," Evelyn said softly. She touched his arm. "You worry too much." Vincent looked at her hand for a second before meeting her eyes. "Maybe I do." It was the answer she expected. She smiled and walked away. Vincent waited until she disappeared into the crowd before speaking to his consigliere. "Take the napkin and the powder to Dr. Harris." The older man nodded. Quietly, especially quietly. "And the receipt?" Vincent looked toward the ballroom windows. Rain had started to fall outside, soft drops sliding down the dark glass. "Find out why a charity meeting ends at a dry cleaner across from a florist." The consigliere took the papers without another question. Vincent trusted him because the old man never asked for explanations he did not need. Across the estate, Grace sat on an upside-down milk crate in the kitchen while the last dinner plates were washed. The television above the refrigerator played a baseball game with the sound turned low. Someone laughed at a joke she could not hear. Emily knelt in front of her daughter and fixed the sleeve of the blue sweater. "Did anyone give you trouble?" Grace shook her head. Emily smiled sadly. "You don't have to protect me." Grace looked at the floor. "I don't want money, Mama." "I know. I don't want a big house either." Emily brushed a strand of hair away from her daughter's face. "What do you want?" Grace thought for a long moment. "I just want people to stop lying." Emily looked away before Grace could see the tears in her eyes. The kitchen phone rang. One of the cooks answered, listened for a few seconds, then called Emily's name. "The front office needs another tray of coffee sent upstairs." Emily stood. "Stay here." Grace nodded. She waited until her mother disappeared through the swinging doors. Then she reached into her pocket and unfolded the florist's receipt again. She had looked at the words table 12 so many times that she almost missed something else. In the corner was a tiny stamp. Paid. 7:29 p.m. Grace frowned. The old grandfather clock near the ballroom had shown 7:28 when she first saw the receipt. How could something be paid for before it was delivered? Upstairs, Vincent stood alone in the library. The rain tapped against the windows. A fire burned quietly in the stone fireplace. His private attorney arrived through a side entrance. "You asked for personnel records," the attorney said. Vincent nodded. "One employee in particular." He slid the dry cleaning receipt across the desk. "The florist across from this address." "Who owns the building?" The attorney adjusted his glasses. "I'll have an answer by morning." Vincent poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass and stared at it without drinking. "I also want the guest list for tonight." "Anything specific?" Vincent thought about the empty chair at table 12. "Tell me who asked to sit there." The attorney opened the folder in his hands. His expression changed almost immediately. "Sir." Vincent looked up. Table 12 wasn't requested by a guest. "Then who assigned it?" The attorney turned another page. According to the seating chart, no table was supposed to be there at all. Vincent did not move. "What?" "The original floor plan has 19 tables." He looked back at the papers. "Someone added table 12 yesterday afternoon." Vincent felt something cold settle in his chest. "Who approved the change?" The attorney checked the signature line. Then he stopped. "There's a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The approval signature belongs to your office." Vincent frowned. "I never signed it." "I know." The attorney slowly pushed the page across the desk. Vincent stared at the elegant signature at the bottom. It looked exactly like his. Every curve, every line, every mark he had used for years. Perfect. Except for one thing. The final stroke of the letter are bent slightly upward. Vincent had broken 2 fingers in his right hand when he was 23. Ever since then, that line always tilted down. He looked at the forged signature for a very long time. Then he whispered to himself, almost too quietly to hear, Someone close enough to watch me sign my name has been practicing it for years. Someone close enough to watch me sign my name has been practicing it for years. Vincent Romano let the thought settle without speaking it aloud again. His attorney waited. The rain tapped against the library windows. The fire cracked softly in the stone hearth. Finally, Vincent folded the forged seating chart and slid it back into the folder. "No one leaves the estate early tonight," he said. "No announcements. No accusations." The attorney nodded. "And Miss Carter?" Vincent looked into the fire. "Treat her exactly the same as always." Downstairs, the party carried on. Grace sat at the end of a long kitchen table, swinging her feet a few inches above the floor. Someone had given her a warm biscuit wrapped in a cloth napkin. She broke it in half and saved the larger piece for her mother. Emily smiled when she saw it. "You're hungry." Grace shook her head. "You're working." Emily looked away before taking the bread. The kitchen clock above the refrigerator clicked to 8:15. Grace stared at it for a second. Then she frowned. "Mama." "What is it? When did Mrs. Carter come to the kitchen?" Emily kept drying a plate. "I don't know. Maybe around 7. "No." Grace looked at the clock again. It was before the 7 o'clock news started. The baseball game wasn't on yet. Emily stopped drying the plate. "You're sure?" Grace nodded. The cook was burning the garlic bread. "He always burns it before the game starts." Emily almost smiled. "That's a funny thing to remember." "I remember because she told me good girls don't repeat grown-up conversations." Emily's smile disappeared. Upstairs, Vincent walked back into the ballroom. Evelyn greeted him with the same gentle warmth she had worn all evening. "There you are," she said. "I was beginning to think you'd escaped." Vincent smiled. "Not yet. You missed the first dance. Then we'll have to make up for it." Evelyn relaxed. Vincent could see it happen. Her shoulders softened. She reached for his hand. Vincent let her. "One question first," he said casually. "Do you remember when you visited the kitchen tonight?" Evelyn laughed. "The kitchen? Why would I remember that?" "Humor me." She thought for only a second. "Around 7:30, I suppose." Vincent nodded as though the answer meant nothing. "Checking on dessert?" "Exactly. I thought so." They walked toward the dance floor. Evelyn never noticed that Vincent had not told her what time anyone claimed she had been there. Across the room, his consigliere watched the conversation without moving. Grace stood near the kitchen entrance carrying a tray of folded towels. She saw Vincent and Evelyn dancing beneath the chandeliers. She saw Vincent smile. For a terrible second she thought he had stopped believing her. Then Vincent looked toward the service hallway. Just once. His eyes found Grace. He gave the smallest nod she had ever seen. Grace looked down at the folded towels in her arms. Something was sticking out between them. A white card. She pulled it free. It was one of the place cards from the ballroom. Table 12. On the back, someone had scribbled a number in black ink. 7:05. Grace stared at it. 7:05. Not 7:30. Not even close. She hurried toward the ballroom entrance. But the older man in the black tuxedo stepped into her path. "You should stay with your mother." Grace held the card tighter. "I have to show Mr. Romano something. He's busy. It's important. I'm sure it can wait." Grace looked up at him. "Did you write this?" The older man blinked. "Just once." "I don't know what you're talking about." Grace did not move. "You hold your pen funny." The man frowned. "What?" "You make your sevens with a line through the middle. So does this." The older man's expression stayed calm, but one hand drifted toward the inside pocket of his jacket. Vincent saw the movement from across the ballroom. He did not walk over. He did not call out. He simply lifted his glass and spoke loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Mr. Holloway." The older man looked up. "Would you join us for a moment?" His hand stopped halfway to his pocket. Grace looked from Vincent to the older man and back again. For the first time all night, she understood something that made her heart beat faster than fear. Vincent Romano had been watching too. Mr. Holloway slowly lowered his hand and forced a smile, but his eyes found Grace for a single unguarded second. In them was something she had not seen before. He was no longer looking at a servant's child. He was looking at the one witness who was no longer standing alone. Mr. Holloway's smile stayed in place, but it no longer reached his eyes. The ballroom music drifted through the estate, soft enough to hide the silence that had settled around the small group. Vincent Romano crossed the polished floor without hurrying. Grace still held the place card marked Table 12. The older man kept his hands folded in front of him. "You wish to see me, sir?" Holloway asked. Vincent looked at the card in Grace's hand. "I did." Grace held it out. The number was there before. Holloway gave a polite laugh. "Children have wonderful imaginations." Vincent accepted the card but did not look at it. "You make your sevens with a cross through the middle?" Holloway blinked once. "Many people do. Not many in this house." Vincent slipped the card into his pocket beside the forged seating chart. "Walk with me." They moved toward the center of the ballroom where Evelyn stood greeting guests. She smiled when she saw them coming. "Vincent, everyone is asking for a toast." "In a moment." His voice was calm. Too calm. Grace stayed close to her mother near the edge of the room. Emily reached for her daughter's hand, but Grace shook her head. "I have to stay." "Why?" Emily whispered. Grace looked toward the ballroom doors. "Because someone will lie again." At that same moment, Vincent's attorney stepped quietly into the room carrying a slim black folder. He walked straight to Vincent and handed it over without a word. Evelyn's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Vincent opened the folder. Inside were 3 papers: the forged seating chart, the florist's order, and a report from the estate's security office. He read the last page once, then again. His hand stopped moving. Holloway noticed. Evelyn noticed. The attorney spoke softly. The missing camera footage wasn't erased. Vincent looked up. "Explain." "It was copied." The attorney removed a small flash drive from the folder and placed it on the white tablecloth beside the untouched champagne glasses. The original file disappeared for 7 minutes because someone exported it to another device. Evelyn folded her hands together. "Surely this can wait until tomorrow." Vincent did not answer. The attorney continued. Security traced the access code used to copy the recording. Holloway's face remained perfectly still. "Whose code?" Vincent asked. The attorney hesitated. "It belonged to a senior member of the household staff." Holloway smiled. "Well then, we have our answer." "Not quite," the attorney replied. "The access code was used at 7:05. Grace looked up immediately. 7:05. The number on the place card. Vincent slowly turned toward her. "You remembered that?" Grace nodded. "I told you." Vincent looked back at the attorney. "Who was in the hallway at 7:05? The attorney reached into the folder again. "That's why I came down myself." He removed a single photograph printed from the recovered security file. The image was grainy, but clear enough. The service hallway, the grandfather clock, the crystal glass on the table, a white cocktail napkin, Evelyn standing beside it, and one more person, Holloway. The older man's smile vanished. The ballroom seemed to lose all sound. Vincent took the photograph but did not speak. Grace looked at the picture. "That's when they talked," she whispered. Emily stared at the image and covered her mouth. Holloway finally found his voice. "A photograph proves nothing." Vincent still said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the picture. He looked at Evelyn, then at Holloway, then back at the photograph. "There's more," the attorney said quietly. He placed one final page on the table. A log from the estate security office. 1 copied file. 7 missing minutes. 1 authorized export. Destination device registered to the estate administrator. Arthur Holloway. Vincent closed his eyes for a brief second. When he opened them, he looked older than he had an hour before. Not because of the evidence. Because he realized the man who had managed his house for almost 20 years had stood beside him through birthdays, funerals, business meetings, and the anniversary of his brother's death. Grace took one small step forward. "Sir," she said softly, "I told you they weren't talking by accident." Vincent looked at the little girl. Then he looked around the ballroom filled with people laughing beneath his name and his roof while lies moved quietly among them. He reached into his pocket and took out the folded place card, the dry cleaning receipt, and the forged seating chart. One by one, he placed them on the white tablecloth beside the photograph and the security report. Then he looked at his attorney with a face so calm it frightened everyone nearest him. "Call my attorney and lock the gates." The gates of Romano Manor closed with a deep iron sound that rolled across the estate like distant thunder. No one shouted. No one ran. Vincent Romano stood beside the long white table where the evidence lay in a careful row. The forged seating chart, the florist's receipt, the embroidered cocktail napkin, the security report, the photograph from the hallway. Arthur Holloway looked at the papers and finally lowered his eyes. Evelyn reached for Vincent's hand one last time. "You don't believe this," she whispered. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. "I believed you for 3 years." The words landed harder than a scream. His attorney stepped forward. "Miss Carter, Mr. Holloway, under the authority granted by the Romano Family Trust and the Estate Board, you are both relieved of all duties and access to estate property pending a formal investigation." Holloway started to speak. Vincent raised one hand. The older man fell silent. "You managed my home," Vincent said quietly. "You stood beside my brother's grave every year and let me believe loyalty could not be bought." Holloway looked at the floor. Evelyn's smile finally disappeared. "Vincent, the engagement is over." No one moved. The attorney nodded toward security. They did not grab anyone. They simply opened the doors and waited. Holloway walked first. Evelyn stood still for another second before taking the ring from her finger and placing it on the table beside the evidence. Vincent did not touch it. The following days were quieter than anyone expected. The estate lawyers turned over the security records and forged documents to investigators. The missing camera files became part of an official case. Financial records were opened. Staff members who had been afraid to speak finally gave statements. Table 12 was removed from every future event schedule. The empty chair for Vincent's brother remained, but no one would ever use his memory to hide another lie. Grace thought it was strange how quiet truth could be. She expected loud arguments and flashing lights. Instead, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon, holding an envelope with shaking hands. Emily opened it twice because she could not believe what she was reading. Her unpaid wages had been calculated and returned in full. A new employment contract guaranteed fair hours, health insurance, and legal protection for every member of the household staff. At the bottom was Vincent Romano's signature, the real one. Emily looked at Grace. "You did this." Grace shook her head. "No, Mama." "Then who?" Grace thought for a second. Maybe everybody stopped pretending. A week later, Vincent asked Emily and Grace to come to the estate. Grace wore the same blue sweater. One sleeve was still shorter than the other. She stood nervously in the great hall where so many adults had looked through her as though she were invisible. This time the entire household staff had been invited. Cooks, gardeners, drivers, housekeepers, security guards. Vincent stood at the front of the room. "I owe someone an apology," he said. The room grew still. Vincent looked at Grace. "A little girl told the truth in my home." He looked at the staff around him. The rest of us were too busy protecting our comfort to listen. He walked toward Grace and knelt until they were the same height. "Thank you for saving my life." Grace looked at her shoes. "I just didn't want anybody to get hurt." Vincent nodded. Then he stood and faced Emily. "You worked in this house for years. My family trusted you to care for us, but we did not do enough to care for you. That ends today." Emily tried to answer but could not. Her eyes filled with tears. Vincent handed her a small folder. Inside was a new position managing the estate kitchens, fair pay, benefits, and a college education fund for Grace. There was also a letter from his legal office promising that if anyone ever threatened their jobs for telling the truth, the Romano family would stand beside them in court. Grace looked through the papers without understanding most of the words. Mga. Yes. Does this mean we don't have to move again? Emily knelt and hugged her daughter. No, sweetheart. Vincent quietly stepped away and walked toward the old library. On a small table by the window sat a silver frame holding a photograph of his brother. Beside it, he placed the embroidered cocktail napkin that had started everything. Not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder that he had almost ignored the smallest voice in the room. When he returned to the kitchen later that evening, Grace and her mother were eating dinner with the staff. A glass of cold milk sat in front of Grace, filled all the way to the top. She looked up at Vincent and smiled. Mr. Romano? Yes. Next time somebody little tells you something. Vincent waited. Grace held up her glass with both hands. Don't wait so long. Vincent could not answer right away. He simply nodded, and in the warm light of the kitchen, where servants and owners sat at the same table, the truth had finally become stronger than the power that had tried to silence it.